In this lesson, we'll take a look at how we can use a ramp shader. So let's go ahead and open up Maya, and I'm actually going to change our renderer from default quality rendering to viewport 2.0, which will give us kind of a better indication of what some of these materials will look like. Okay, now I want to go into the Hypershade, and I want to create a new material, and for this one I want to create a ramp shader. So I'll go ahead and add the ramp shader, and let's apply it to our canopy. So right click, assign material to selection. Okay, now let's open up our ramp shader. I'll try to keep everything in the screen so you can see it here. So we have here under the common material attributes, we have color, transparency, incandescence, specular shading, specular color, so forth, so on and so forth. And then down here we have reflectivity. Okay, so on the reflectivity and environment, you'll see that we have down here reflected color, and we have an option for adding a node. So under reflected color, let's go ahead and add a node, and let's actually add a file node. So this is going to allow us to add an external texture, which we'll look more at later on, but let's just go ahead and click File. So bring up the File dialog. We want to go ahead under Image Name and bring up an image. So in our source images, let's go ahead and choose the lake image. And we'll go ahead and open that up, and you can see in our viewport 2.0 we're able to see that. And that's actually not in the color, that's the reflection. So we want to actually drive the reflection based on the angle that this canopy is facing. So if you look at windows and things like that on maybe like a bus or something where it's facing you, it's kind of like the same thing with water. If it's facing you, the reflectivity is not so much, but as the angle, the incidence angle starts to move away, the reflectivity becomes more pronounced, so it'll be more reflective on the edges. So that's what we want to do. So under the reflectivity, you can see we have options here for moving this up and down. Okay, and I can change the amount of reflectivity. We can change the interpolation of the curve. Okay, and right now we jump up here, we can change this to a facing angle. There's also brightness, normalized brightness, but I want to change that to facing angle. And then we can come down here and start to play with this a little bit. So I actually want to pull this over a little bit more, so it's going to be more reflective at the edges, and you can see how this changes. So as the incidence faces away from us, it's going to be more reflective. Okay, under the color, let's go ahead and change our color, and let's make it black. Okay, so we get something like that. Now, I don't want it to be quite that reflective, and so we can go ahead and take this down a little bit. And come in here. Oh, that's the specular roll off. Wrong curve. And so let's go ahead and bring this down a little bit. So we end up with something more like that, where you just get the reflection on the side. But you can see how we're able to drive that. And the ramp shader is actually really powerful once you get into doing materials and texturing. There's a lot more involved in there that you can modify. Okay. Now, one thing that you can also do here as we start to work on our materials is to preview those using an IPR render. So if we go ahead and hit IPR, you can see that we can drop that in, and I can draw out a scene here, and then as I modify the values, so let's say under the reflectivity, I change that, you can see it update automatically in the IPR render. So it's rendering it, but it's doing it automatically as we make changes, increasing that. Okay, so that's another way to kind of keep track, and we'll use this more as we start to get into some of the other materials that we're creating using that IPR render. Okay. All right, so that's the ramp shader. You can see how it updates really nicely here in our viewport 2.0. The next thing that we want to look at is how can we actually add multiple materials to single objects? So we have something like the thrusters. How do we add different materials to different parts of the object? So we'll take a look at that in the next lesson.